My son-in-law walked into my home, took something that wasn't his, sold it for pocket change and thought he could get away with it. What he didn't know was that I had a plan that would cost him everything. And trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why some mistakes come with a price tag you can't afford. Look, I'm not the kind of person who holds grudges. I've always believed in giving people second chances, maybe even third chances. But there's a line, right? And when someone crosses that line, especially when it involves disrespecting something that means the world to you, something that connects you to people you've lost, well, that's when you realize some lessons need to be taught the hard way. This story is about trust, about family, and about what happens when someone thinks they're smarter than everyone else in the room. And if you've ever dealt with someone who took advantage of your kindness, you're going to want to hear every single word of what I'm about to tell you. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. It helps me bring you more stories like this one, stories that matter, stories that show you how to handle the difficult people in your life. Now let's get into it. My name doesn't matter for this story, but what does matter is what I'm about to share with you. I'm a retired watchmaker. Spent 42 years of my life working with timepieces, fixing them, restoring them, understanding their value not just in dollars but in history and memory. When you work with watches for that long, you develop a connection with them. They're not just objects. They're pieces of time itself, frozen moments that people wore on their wrists during the most important days of their lives. Now, among my collection I had one watch that stood out from all the rest. It was a 1962 Omega Speedmaster, one of the early models before they even went to the moon. My father gave it to me on my 21st birthday. He wore it every single day of his working life. When he handed it to me, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "This watch has seen me through my best days and my worst days. It never stopped, and neither should you." My father passed away 15 years ago, and that watch became more than just a timepiece. It was my connection to him. Every time I looked at it, I could hear his voice. I could remember his lessons. I could feel like he was still here, guiding me. I kept that watch in a display case in my study. Everyone in the family knew what it meant to me. My wife knew. My daughter knew. And yes, my son-in-law Jake knew too. Jake married my daughter Emma 3 years ago. Nice guy on the surface. Charming, always knew what to say, always had a smile ready. But there was something about him that never quite sat right with me. Maybe it was the way he talked about money all the time, always looking for shortcuts, always trying to find the easy way to get what he wanted. Emma loved him though, and I respected her choice. I kept my opinions to myself and tried to build a relationship with the guy. About 6 months ago, Jake started talking about buying a car. Not just any car. He wanted one of those flashy sports cars, something that would turn heads, something that would make people think he was more successful than he actually was. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with wanting nice things. But Jake didn't have the money for this car. He was working a decent job, nothing special, and Emma was working part-time while finishing her degree. They were doing okay, but they weren't in a position to drop $30,000 on a car that Jake didn't even need. Every time we had a family dinner, Jake would bring it up. "I'm so close to getting that car," he'd say. "Just need to figure out the down payment." My wife and I would exchange looks across the table. We knew what he was hinting at. He wanted us to help him financially. But we'd already helped them with their wedding, helped them with the deposit on their apartment, helped them more times than I can count. At some point, you have to let people stand on their own 2 feet. Then one Sunday, Jake came over to the house alone. Emma was at a study group. He said he wanted to talk to me about something important, man to man. We sat in the living room and he started telling me about this incredible investment opportunity he'd found. Some friend of his was selling a car below market value, and if Jake could just get the money together in the next few days, he could flip it for a profit. It was the oldest story in the book and I wasn't buying it. I told him straight up, "Jake, I'm not giving you money for a car. You need to save up like everyone else." He didn't like that answer. I could see it in his face. His smile faded and for just a second I saw something else there. Resentment maybe. Anger. But he covered it up quick, laughed it off, said he understood, said he'd figure it out on his own. He left about an hour later and I didn't think much more about it. That was my mistake. 2 weeks passed. Everything seemed normal. Then one evening I was in my study and I went to check on my watch collection like I did every few days. I opened the display case and my heart stopped. The Omega Speedmaster was gone. The space where it should have been was empty. I stood there for a solid minute just staring at that empty spot, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I tore that study apart looking for it. Maybe I'd moved it and forgotten. Maybe I'd taken it out to show someone. But deep down I knew. I knew it was gone and I knew it didn't just disappear on its own. I went to my wife, asked her if she'd seen it, if she'd moved it. She hadn't. She saw the look on my face and immediately knew something was seriously wrong. We started thinking about who had been in the house recently. My daughter had a key, but she would never take it. She knew what that watch meant to me. Then it hit me. Jake had been alone in the house for about 20 minutes that Sunday while I was in the garage looking for some old photos he'd asked to see. My study door had been open. The display case wasn't locked because I never thought I needed to lock it in my own home. I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't. But I had to know for sure. I called Emma and asked her very carefully if Jake had mentioned anything about my watch. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Dad, Jake bought a car last week. He said he got a great deal from a friend and paid cash for it." My hands were shaking. I asked her how much he paid. She said $22,000. I asked her where he got that kind of money. She said he told her he'd been saving up, that he'd sold some old electronics and tools he had lying around. But I could hear the doubt in her voice. She was starting to put the pieces together too. I needed proof before I confronted him. I'm not the kind of person who throws around accusations without evidence. So I started making some calls. I have connections in the watch community, people who buy and sell vintage timepieces, people who would know if something like my Omega had hit the market recently. Took me 3 days, but I found it. A pawn shop about 40 miles away had bought a 1962 Omega Speedmaster 2.5 weeks ago. The description matched mine perfectly, right down to the small scratch on the back of the case that my father had made accidentally when he first got it. I drove out there with my original purchase documents, photos of the watch, everything I needed to prove it was mine. The guy at the pawn shop, older fellow named Rick, he was sympathetic when I explained the situation. He pulled up the transaction on his computer and showed me the seller's name. Jake Morrison. My son-in-law. There it was in black and white. He'd sold my father's watch, my most precious possession, for $18,000. Not even close to its actual value. That watch was worth at least $45,000 to the right collector, maybe more. But Jake didn't know that because he didn't care to know. He just saw dollar signs and took the first offer he could get. Rick told me that legally, since he'd purchased it in good faith, the watch belonged to the pawn shop now unless I wanted to buy it back. It was on sale for $28,000. So let me get this straight. Jake stole my watch, sold it for $18,000, and now I'd have to pay $28,000 to get it back. The rage I felt in that moment, I can't even describe it. But I kept my cool. I thanked Rick for his help and told him I'd be in touch. I drove home in complete silence. My wife could tell from my face that I'd confirmed our worst fears. I showed her the paperwork from the pawn shop. She started crying. Not just because of the watch, but because of what this meant for our daughter's marriage. Emma had married a thief. A man who would steal from his own family. Now, I could have called the police. I had every right to. What Jake did was theft, plain and simple. He could have been arrested, charged, possibly sent to jail. But I thought about Emma. A criminal record would destroy Jake's career, and by extension, it would hurt my daughter's future too. As angry as I was, I couldn't do that to her. But I also wasn't going to let this slide. Jake needed to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't just take what isn't yours and expect to get away with it. So I started forming a plan. A plan that would cost him far more than $18,000, but wouldn't involve the police. A plan that would be perfectly legal but absolutely devastating. First, I went back to the pawn shop and bought my watch back. $28,000. It hurt to pay that much for something that was already mine, but I needed it for what came next. Then I called Emma and asked her to set up a family dinner at our house for that weekend. Nothing unusual about that. We had family dinners all the time. She agreed without suspicion. Next, I made some calls to people I knew in Jake's industry. See, Jake worked in sales for a mid-sized company, and in that world, reputation is everything. Your professional network is your lifeline. I didn't spread lies or rumors. I didn't have to. I simply let it be known, through the grapevine, that Jake had some serious character questions hanging over him. Nothing specific, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. In the business world, sometimes that's all it takes. Then came the hard part. I had to tell Emma. I couldn't blindside her at the dinner. She deserved to know what her husband had done before everyone else found out. So I invited her over for coffee, just the two of us, and I laid it all out. The missing watch. The pawn shop. The proof of sale. Everything. I'll never forget the look on my daughter's face when I showed her the documents. It was like watching her heart break in real time. She kept saying no over and over, like if she said it enough times, it would change reality. She tried to come up with alternative explanations. Maybe someone else stole the watch and used Jake's ID. Maybe the pawn shop made a mistake. But deep down she knew. The timeline matched up perfectly with when he bought the car. She asked me what I was going to do. I told her about the family dinner, told her that I was going to confront Jake in front of everyone. She begged me not to. She said it would humiliate him, that we could handle this privately, that maybe he'd made a mistake and deserved a chance to make it right. And I understood where she was coming from. No one wants their spouse publicly shamed. But I explained to her that this wasn't just about the watch. This was about respect. About boundaries. About the fundamental trust that holds a family together. Jake had violated all of that, and he needed to understand the weight of what he'd done. A private conversation would let him minimize it, make excuses, maybe even convince Emma to take his side. No, this needed to be public within our family. Everyone needed to see who Jake really was. Emma was torn. I could see her struggling between loyalty to her husband and loyalty to her family. Finally, she said she'd be at the dinner, but she wouldn't help me. She wouldn't defend Jake, but she wouldn't participate in confronting him either. I accepted that. It was more than I expected, honestly. The night of the dinner arrived. My wife had prepared a full meal like always. Emma and Jake showed up right on time. My son was there with his wife. My brother and his family. About 12 people total. Jake walked in smiling, acting like everything was normal. He complimented my wife on how good the food smelled. He made small talk with my son about football. He was playing his part perfectly. We all sat down to eat. Conversation flowed naturally. Jake seemed relaxed, confident even. He had no idea what was coming. About halfway through the meal, during a lull in conversation, I cleared my throat and stood up. Everyone looked at me, probably thinking I was about to make a toast or something. Instead, I said, I want to talk about something important tonight. Something that affects this entire family. The room went quiet. Jake glanced at Emma, probably wondering if she'd told me about some surprise they had planned. Emma was staring at her plate, not making eye contact with anyone. I continued. About 3 weeks ago, something very valuable was taken from my study. Something that meant more to me than almost anything else I own. My father's watch. The Omega Speedmaster he gave me on my 21st birthday. I watched Jake's face as I said this. His smile didn't fade, but something changed in his eyes. A flash of panic, quickly hidden. Now, at first I couldn't figure out what happened to it. I went on. I thought maybe I'd misplaced it somehow. But then I did some investigating and I found out that my watch was sold to a pawn shop 40 miles from here. Sold for $18,000 to a man named Jake Morrison. The room erupted. Everyone started talking at once. My son jumped up from his chair. My sister-in-law gasped. My wife sat perfectly still, her face set in stone. And Jake's face went through about 5 different expressions in 3 seconds. Shock, denial, anger, fear, and finally, a kind of desperate calculation as he tried to figure out how to get out of this. Before we move to part 2, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and leave a comment telling me what you think Jake's next move should be. Your engagement helps me keep bringing you these real-life stories that show you how to deal with difficult situations. Now let's see what happened next. Look, if you're watching this right now, I need you to do something for me. Smash that subscribe button because stories like this one, they're rare, they're real, and they show you exactly how to handle people who think they can walk all over you. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you've ever had someone in your family betray your trust like this. What would you do in my situation? Your comments help this video reach more people who need to hear this message. And hit that like button because we're just getting started. The next part is where everything falls apart for Jake, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Jake stood up so fast his chair almost fell over. There's been some kind of mistake here. His voice was shaking. He looked around the table, trying to find a friendly face, someone who would believe him. But everyone was just staring at him with these expressions of shock and disgust. A mistake, I said, keeping my voice calm. Is that what we're calling theft now? I pulled out the papers from the pawn shop, laid them on the table right in front of him. That's your signature, isn't it, Jake? That's your driver's license number. That's the date you sold my father's watch, the same week you mysteriously had enough cash to buy yourself a brand new car. Emma was crying now, quiet tears running down her face. She wasn't looking at Jake. She wasn't looking at anyone. My son stood up and walked over to stand behind my chair, a silent show of support. Jake's face was getting red, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. I was going to pay you back, he finally said. I just needed the money temporarily. It was a loan, not stealing. I was going to buy the watch back and return it before you even noticed it was gone. The audacity of this statement actually made me laugh. A loan? A loan requires asking permission, Jake. A loan requires an agreement. What you did was break into my display case when I wasn't looking and take something that didn't belong to you. That's called stealing and you know it." My brother, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "How did you even know the combination to the display case?" That was a good question. I'd been wondering the same thing. Jake's silence was all the answer we needed. Emma suddenly looked up, her face going pale. "The combination is my birthday," she whispered. "I told you last year when Dad showed me his collection. I told you in case of emergency, in case something ever happened to Dad and we needed to get something from the case. You used your wife's birthday," my son said, his voice full of contempt. "You used the trust she placed in you to steal from her father. Man, that's low even for someone like you." Jake tried a different approach. He turned to Emma, reached for her hand. She pulled away. "Emma, baby, please. Your dad's making this seem worse than it is. Yes, I took the watch, but I had a plan. The car I bought, it's an investment. I can sell it for more in 6 months and pay everything back with interest. I was trying to build a future for us. By stealing from my family?" Emma's voice was barely a whisper, but everyone heard it. "By lying to me every single day for 3 weeks? By making me think you were responsible and mature when you were just a thief? Don't call me that." Jake's temper was finally showing. "I'm not a thief. I'm your husband. I made one mistake because I was desperate, because I wanted to give you a better life, and now your whole family is treating me like a criminal." I sat back down, folding my hands on the table. "You want to talk about desperation, Jake? Let me tell you about desperation. My father wore that watch through the Great Depression. He wore it when he came home from the war. He wore it the day I was born, the day he buried his own father, the day he walked my daughter down the aisle at her wedding to you. That watch survived 70 years of history, and you sold it to a pawn shop for beer money. It wasn't beer money, it was $18,000. Jake shot back. "The watch is worth $45,000 to a collector," I said quietly. "You sold it for less than half its value because you didn't bother to do any research. You didn't care what it was worth. You just saw something shiny you could trade for cash." The number hit Jake like a physical blow. You could see him doing the math in his head, realizing just how badly he'd screwed up. "I didn't know," he said weakly. "The pawn shop guy said 18 was fair." "Of course he did," my brother said with a harsh laugh. "Because you walked in there desperate and clueless and he took advantage of you. Which is exactly what you did to this family." My wife finally spoke. She'd been silent this whole time, just watching Jake with these cold, evaluating eyes. "Did you even think about what that watch meant? Did you consider for 1 second that some things aren't for sale?" "Everything's for sale," Jake muttered. "That's how the world works." Wrong answer. Emma stood up, grabbed her purse. "I can't do this right now. I can't sit here and listen to you defend what you did. I'm going to my friend's place. Don't call me. Don't text me. I need time to think about whether I even want to be married to someone who would do this." Jake tried to follow her, but my son blocked his path. "Sit down," he said firmly. "You're not going anywhere until we finish this conversation." For a second I thought Jake might try to push past him. But he looked around the room, saw all these faces looking at him with anger and disappointment, and whatever fight was left in him just drained away. He sat back down, slumping in his chair like a deflated balloon. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, taking control of the situation. "I've already bought the watch back from the pawn shop. Cost me $28,000 to get back what was already mine. You owe me that $28,000 plus the $10,000 difference between what you got and what the watch is actually worth. That's $38,000 total." "I don't have that kind of money," Jake said. "You know I don't." "Then you're going to get it," I replied. "You're going to sell that car you just bought. I already checked the market value. You can get about $20,000 for it if you sell it this week. That leaves $18,000 you still owe me. How am I supposed to come up with $18,000? Jake's voice was rising again. "I'm drowning in debt as it is. The car was supposed to help me get ahead." "You should have thought about that before you stole from me," I said simply. "You're going to take out a personal loan. You're going to get a second job. You're going to do whatever it takes to pay back every single penny. And until that debt is paid in full, you're not welcome in this house. You're not invited to family gatherings. You don't exist to this family." Jake looked around the table, searching for sympathy. He found none. "This is insane. You're going to destroy my marriage, destroy my life over a watch?" My son leaned forward, his voice hard. "You destroyed your own marriage when you decided stealing was easier than working. You destroyed your own life when you betrayed the people who welcomed you into this family. This is on you, Jake. All of it." "What about Emma?" Jake asked, and for the first time he sounded genuinely scared. What's going to happen to us? That's up to her, I said. But I'll tell you this much. My daughter deserves someone who respects her family, and respects the things we hold sacred. You've proven you're not that person. Whether she gives you a chance to become that person is her choice, not mine. The dinner was over. Everyone started leaving, giving Jake a wide berth as they filed out. My sister-in-law stopped to hug my wife, whispering something I couldn't hear. My brother clapped me on the shoulder on his way out. Within 10 minutes, it was just me, my wife, and Jake sitting at that table with cold food and empty plates. You need to leave now, my wife said quietly. And Jake, if you're smart, you'll start figuring out how to make this right. Not for us, but for Emma. Because right now, you've lost everything that matters, and it's going to take more than apologies to get any of it back. Jake stood up slowly, like he'd aged 10 years in the last hour. He walked to the door without saying another word. We heard his car start up and drive away. Then it was just the two of us, sitting in the silence of our dining room. Do you think we were too hard on him? My wife asked after a while. I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I finally said. If we let this go, if we just accepted his apologies and moved on, what would that teach him? What would that teach Emma? Some lines can't be uncrossed. Some betrayals can't be forgiven without consequences. Over the next few days, things moved fast. Emma called me and told me she'd asked Jake to move out of their apartment temporarily. She needed space to process everything. Jake sent me a long text message apologizing again, promising he'd pay me back, begging me to help him save his marriage. I didn't respond. Then I got a call from Jake's boss. Apparently, Jake had been putting me down as a reference for a promotion he was going for at work. His boss wanted to know if I could speak to Jake's character. I was honest. I told him about the theft, about the betrayal of trust, about how Jake had valued a car more than his family relationships. The promotion didn't happen. In fact, 2 weeks later, Jake lost his job entirely. The company decided they couldn't have someone with integrity issues in a sales position. When Emma found out I'd cost Jake his job, she was furious with me. Dad, how is he supposed to pay you back if he can't work? How is he supposed to support himself? She had a point, but I wasn't backing down. He can find another job, I told her. One where they don't know about his theft. But I wasn't going to lie for him, Emma. I wasn't going to help him climb a ladder he doesn't deserve to be on. You're destroying him, she said, her voice breaking. You're taking everything away from him. He destroyed himself, I replied. I'm just making sure there are consequences for what he did. That's how the world works, sweetheart. Actions have results. She hung up on me. For 3 weeks, my daughter didn't speak to me. That was hard. Harder than losing the watch, harder than confronting Jake, harder than anything else in this whole mess. My wife tried to mediate, but Emma wasn't ready to hear it. She was standing by her husband, which part of me respected even as it broke my heart. Then one morning I got a call from Emma. Can you come over? She asked. I need to show you something. Her voice sounded strange. Hello. I drove to her apartment. Jake wasn't there. Emma looked like she hadn't slept in days. She handed me her laptop without saying a word. On the screen was Jake's email inbox. She'd figured out his password. And what I saw there made my blood boil all over again. Jake had been planning this for months. There were emails to the pawn shop from 2 months before the theft, asking about selling vintage watches. There were searches about my watch collection, looking up values and buyers. There were messages to his friends where he bragged about how he was going to score big off his rich father-in-law. This wasn't a desperate mistake. This wasn't a moment of weakness. Jake had deliberately targeted my watch, researched its value, planned the theft, and executed it. And he would have gotten away with it if I hadn't checked my collection when I did. I found these last night, Emma said softly. I was looking for job application emails trying to help him find work. And I found all of this instead. She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. You were right, Dad. About all of it. He's not who I thought he was. I wanted to say, I told you so. I wanted to be angry at her for defending him, for choosing him over her family. But looking at my daughter's broken face, all I felt was sad. Sad that she'd married someone who could do this. Sad that she had to learn this lesson the hard way. What are you going to do? I asked her. I'm filing for divorce, she said. And I'm going to help you get every penny back from him. I don't care how long it takes. That was 4 months ago. Jake sold the car like I demanded. He came up with $12,000 after the loan payoff, not the $20,000 I'd expected. Turned out he'd gotten a terrible financing deal on top of everything else. He's working 2 jobs now, some retail thing during the day and driving for a rideshare service at night. He sends me $500 a month, which means at this rate, he'll have me paid back in about 4 years. Emma's divorce is almost final. She moved back in with us temporarily while she finishes school. She's doing better. Stronger. She told me last week that she's glad this happened now rather than 10 years and 2 kids down the road. She's right. As for Jake, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he's struggling. Can't afford his apartment on his own. Can't find a decent job because word got around about why he was really fired. Can't date anyone because Emma's friends made sure everyone knows what he did. His life fell apart piece by piece and I don't feel bad about it. Not even a little bit. Some people think I went too far. Some people think I should have just called the police and been done with it. Some people think I should have forgiven him and moved on. But here's what I know. That watch sits in my study right now, back where it belongs. Every time I look at it, I remember my father. I remember his strength, his principles, his unwillingness to tolerate disrespect or dishonesty. And I know I honored his memory by not letting Jake get away with what he did. You don't get to steal from family and walk away unscathed. You don't get to betray trust and expect forgiveness without consequences. And you definitely don't get to treat priceless memories like they're just assets to be liquidated when you want a new toy. Jake learned that lesson the hard way. And honestly, I hope he never forgets it. Before we get to the final part of this story, I need you to do something right now. If you're still watching, that means this story is hitting home for you. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I share real stories like this every single week. Stories about standing up for yourself when people try to take advantage of you. Drop a comment and tell me, was I too harsh on Jake or did he get exactly what he deserved? I read every single comment and your opinions matter. Smash that like button to help more people find this story. Now let's finish this because what happens next will show you why sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. Now, I wish I could tell you that was the end of it. That Jake learned his lesson, paid me back, and everyone moved on with their lives. But life doesn't work that cleanly, does it? About 6 weeks after Emma filed for divorce, things took another turn. I got a message on Facebook from someone I didn't know. A woman named Sarah. She said she needed to talk to me about Jake, that it was urgent and could we meet for coffee. My first instinct was to ignore it. I'd had enough of Jake drama to last me a lifetime. But something about her message felt serious, so I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near my house. Sarah turned out to be Jake's ex-girlfriend from before he met Emma. They'd dated for almost 3 years. And what she told me over coffee that day made me realize Jake's theft of my watch wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. He did the same thing to me, Sarah said, stirring her coffee nervously. My grandmother left me a diamond bracelet when she passed. It was the only thing of value I owned. Jake and I were living together at the time, and one day I came home and it was gone. He swore he didn't know what happened to it, said maybe we'd been robbed. But nothing else was missing. Just the bracelet. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures. Police reports. Pawn shop records that she tracked down months later. Jake had sold her bracelet for $6,000 and used the money to pay off credit card debt he'd racked up without telling her. I broke up with him immediately, Sarah continued. But I never pressed charges because he convinced me it would ruin his life, that he'd pay me back, that it was a one-time mistake. He never paid me back. Not a single dollar. When I heard through mutual friends that he'd done something similar to his new wife's family, I knew I had to reach out. I sat there processing this information. Jake hadn't made a desperate mistake with my watch. This was who he was. A man who saw the people closest to him as resources to exploit. A man who would steal from the people who trusted him most and then play the victim when he got caught. Why are you telling me this now? I asked Sarah. Because I should have spoken up sooner, she said. If I'd pressed charges back then, if I'd made sure other people knew what he was capable of, maybe your daughter never would have married him. Maybe she would have been spared all of this. I carry that guilt every day. I thanked Sarah for coming forward and told her it wasn't her fault. How could she have known Jake would do it again? But her information gave me an idea. If Jake had a history of this behavior, maybe there was a way to make sure he never did it to anyone else. I contacted a lawyer. Not to sue Jake, but to understand my options. The lawyer told me that while I couldn't force Sarah to press charges for something that happened years ago, I could make Jake's theft of my watch a matter of public record without necessarily sending him to jail. I could file a civil lawsuit for the full value of the watch plus damages. Even if Jake couldn't pay, the judgment would follow him for years. It would show up on background checks. It would affect his ability to get loans, rent apartments, even get certain jobs. It's a scarlet letter, the lawyer explained. Legal, permanent, and more effective than any revenge you could dream up. I filed the lawsuit. Jake tried to fight it at first, but his public defender took one look at the evidence and told him to settle. Jake agreed to a payment plan that would take him 8 years to complete at his current income level. 8 years of his life dedicated to paying for what he stole from me. The judgment became public record. Emma supported my decision. In fact, she testified in the proceedings about how Jake had lied to her, how he'd used her trust to access my home and commit the theft. Watching my daughter stand up in front of a judge and detail how her husband had betrayed her family was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. But she did it with strength and dignity that made me incredibly proud. After the settlement was finalized, something unexpected happened. Other people started coming forward. A former roommate who'd had rent money go missing. A coworker who'd lent Jake $2,000 that was never repaid. A cousin who'd had concert tickets stolen and resold. The pattern went back almost a decade. Jake had been doing this his entire adult life, always in small enough amounts that people didn't think it was worth pursuing legally, always with enough charm and excuses that people gave him the benefit of the doubt. But now, with a legal judgment against him and multiple people willing to share their stories, Jake's reputation was completely destroyed. He had to move 3 hours away to find work because no one in our area would hire him. His family stopped talking to him after they found out about all the other victims. He became a cautionary tale in our community about what happens when you burn every bridge you have. Emma's divorce was finalized about 8 months after all of this started. She kept her maiden name, finished her degree, and got a job at a nonprofit that helps people recover from financial abuse. She turned her painful experience into something meaningful. She helps other people recognize the warning signs she missed with Jake. She's happy now, really happy, in a way I don't think she ever was during her marriage. As for my watch, it sits in my study just like it always did. But now the display case has a proper lock, and I'm the only one who knows the combination. I look at it every morning when I have my coffee. It reminds me of my father, yes, but now it also reminds me of something else. It reminds me that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, and it's not always pretty, but it's always worth it. People ask me sometimes if I regret how I handled things. They ask if I think I was too harsh, if I destroyed Jake's life over a material possession. And here's what I tell them. I didn't destroy Jake's life. Jake destroyed his own life by choosing theft over honesty, by choosing manipulation over integrity, by choosing shortcuts over hard work. All I did was make sure he faced the consequences of those choices. My wife and I recently celebrated our 43rd wedding anniversary. Emma was there, smiling and laughing in a way we hadn't seen since before she met Jake. My son and his wife announced they're expecting our first grandchild. Life moves forward. The family heals. But we're all a little wiser now, a little more cautious about who we let into our inner circle. Jake still sends his monthly payments. $500 like clockwork. He never includes a note, never tries to explain or apologize anymore. Just the payment. He has 7 years and 4 months left on his payment plan. Sometimes I wonder what he thinks about when he makes those transfers. Does he regret what he did? Does he understand why it cost him everything? Or does he still see himself as the victim of a vindictive father-in-law who overreacted? I'll probably never know, and honestly, I don't care. What matters is that my daughter is free of him. What matters is that my father's watch is back where it belongs. What matters is that the next time someone thinks about stealing from someone who trusted them, maybe they'll remember stories like this one and think twice. Because here's the truth that took me 72 years to fully understand. Trust is the most valuable thing we have as human beings. It's more valuable than money, more valuable than possessions, more valuable than almost anything else. When someone violates that trust, especially someone who's supposed to be family, the damage goes deep. It's not about the watch. It never was about the watch. It was about respect. It was about recognizing that some things are sacred, and some lines should never be crossed. Jake crossed that line. He paid the price. And I sleep just fine at night knowing that justice, real justice, isn't always about jail cells and criminal records. Sometimes it's about making sure someone faces the full weight of what they've done, day after day, month after month, year after year, until the debt is paid. My father always told me that a man's character is revealed not in his moments of strength, but in his moments of weakness. In his moment of weakness, Jake revealed himself to be a thief and a liar. In mine, I chose to stand firm on principle rather than take the easy path of forgiveness without accountability. I think my father would have approved. The watch still keeps perfect time, by the way. 63 years old, and it hasn't missed a beat. There's a metaphor in there somewhere about things that are built to last, about quality and craftsmanship and integrity. Things my father valued. Things I value. Things I hope I've passed on to my children. Emma asked me recently if I thought she'd ever trust someone enough to get married again. I told her I hoped so, but only when she found someone who understood that trust is earned through consistent action, not just nice words. Someone who understood that family heirlooms aren't just objects, they're connections to the people we've loved and lost. Someone who would rather work 3 jobs than take something that didn't belong to them. Someone the opposite of Jake, she said with a sad smile. Exactly, I replied. Someone the opposite of Jake. So that's my story. A son-in-law who thought he could steal from family without consequences learned the hard way that some debts take years to repay. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to stand up to someone who betrayed your trust, hit that subscribe button right now. I share stories like this because they matter, because they show you that standing up for yourself is always the right choice. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.